Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of my RotMG rankings list, and for this one's going to be the last one, at least in this section, the UT weapons. So once again, it's going to be all the non-vanity, non-limited time UT weapons, including reskins and the like, because they're just the same. And we have a decent selection. I think this is roughly the same amount as the armors, or maybe a little bit more than armors, which is perfectly fine because there's a lot of classes in there and a lot of weapons to choose from. I also left out the ST weapons. I know there's a ton of STs that are very, very good, and people have been asking me to go over them, but for the meantime, I just want to go over UTs. We can do STs later on, because there's enough ST weapons or ST items to warrant a different video series off of that, so yeah. Okay, last thing before we get started, just remember that this is based on my favorite rankings, so stuff that is better or worse, just subjectively speaking, may not exactly apply. It does play a part because naturally, what weapons are powerful are weapons I like to use, but it may not always translate one-to-one with whether or not I think one weapon is just better than the other, and so don't take this as an objective tier list. It's more a mixture of my opinion on what I like, what I prefer. It's somewhat partly impacted by how powerful the item is. Oh, and also, at the time I'm recording this video, the Oryx 3 UT weapons are out, but I don't have them, nor do I have any understanding of them because I didn't access them on the testing server, and so we're just gonna assume that there aren't any for this video. Let's get started. I didn't order this, which means we'll have to, I guess, start from left to right. I want to do the Agents of Oryx ones last. Where is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, good. We'll do the daggers first. Why not? I figured dagger works perfectly fine. Okay. Poison Fang dagger, the one that you can get from the spider den. You know what? I never really found a need for it, but similar to how I ranked the snakeskin armor or the snakeskin shield, it's pretty appropriate for when you actually need it, because the DPS of a Poison Fang dagger I think is about the same as a T7 dagger or so, and you can do a spider den quite easily even if you're just leveling up in realms, so I think it's not bad enough to warrant a D tier, since at the time that you need the dagger or you would want to find the dagger, it's pretty good, so we'll put it at C tier. Next one is the Queen Stinger. I'm going to put it at B tier. People give Queen Stinger's dagger a lot of praise for being the only dagger in the game that can both deal true damage and pierce through targets, so it can be both a mobbing dagger and a pretty solid dagger against high defense. Here's the problem though. The Queen Stinger dagger not only has reduced range, which means while you can mob with it, you can't really reach too far, and most dagger classes, in fact all dagger classes, aren't too keen on wanting to clear as many targets at once because they're just really squishy. They're more focused on rushing and avoiding contact. But the main problem stems from the fact that while the Queen Stinger's dagger does do true damage, it doesn't do enough true damage to warrant using it over a standard DPS dagger because 1, you don't really run into too many high defense enemies these days, enough to make the true damage beat out Symbiotic Ripper or the Dirk Cronus. And 9 times out of 10, there's an Augmer or a Poison Augmer nearby that would armor break the target, and so the application of this weapon's true damage is not exactly as practical as people think it is, and so that's why I put it B tier. If it had more damage, maybe I'd put it higher, but I just think that there are better options to use in terms of specialization. Bone Dagger, D tier. Okay, so what makes Bone Dagger better than, or worse than the Poison Fang is that the Bone Dagger is modestly difficult to find in the Manor of Immortals. But when you do run Manor of Immortals, you probably have like a T10 or T11 dagger, which does way better than the Bone Dagger to begin with, and so therefore, you don't really need to pick this up. It has terrible range, like the same range as, or worse range than a katana, which means the mobbing capability of this dagger is just useless whatsoever. So I think Bone Dagger is kind of pointless, but I like the fact that it has kind of a sharpened edge in terms of the sprite, similar to the Queen Stinger. The Queen Stinger is meant to be just a better version of the Bone Dagger, but if the Queen Stinger's dagger is not that great, then the Bone Dagger is much, much worse. Next on the list, Dirk of Cronus. A tier dagger. Now all the buff Sea Dirk memes aside, it's good. It's a pretty good dagger. It's not as powerful as the Symbiotic Ripper and such, but where it stands is a very strong dagger. I think the only thing that it could use is just bring the range back to 5.6. I don't see a reason why it has to be 4.5. I think 5.6 is perfectly fine. The 6 wisdom bonus is great for assassins if you ever want to get more poisons thrown in, or maybe trickster if you need more regeneration on your mana. But overall, the Sea Dirk, it's a beautiful sprite. I can't exactly rate it an S tier because daggers in general are just not really the selling point for dagger classes. You would use a rogue or trickster to rush, or for trickster's ability to teleport and put decoys everywhere, and assassin mostly fights with their poison, so their daggers isn't exactly the main selling point of that class type. And so, you know, I'll just put it A tier. I think it's a fair rating. I do side with a party that thinks that it needs more buffs, and so therefore, yeah, it's not exactly an S tier dagger. Next one, Spirit Dagger, B tier. It's okay. It's a side grade, you know, it's a side grade from a standard tier dagger. It is a bit better in general. It's more inconsistent than a foul, but it is better in terms of if you're dealing with higher defense. I think it's not, you know, it's not bad. It's not bad, it's not great. It's pretty solid considering how common it is. It is one of the more common white bags, I think, especially for people who run Davies a lot. And so I don't really see a reason to place it any higher or lower. I think Corrosion Cutter. So Corrosion Cutter, it's hard for me to form a proper opinion on it. I do have it. I just think that I don't really see a reason why I would want to use Corrosion, or not Corrosion Cutter, that's the reskin, Corruption Cutter, excuse me. The Corruption Cutter, it's okay. It's a dual firing dagger, the first one of its kind, and it does have the highest DPS if you can land all of your shots, but I believe at a certain amount of defense is when it starts to really fall off because it loses more damage over quantity due to the fact that it fires 2 shots and has a higher rate of fire. I think where it needs to shine, it looks like it can. I like the sprite. It looks sort of like I don't know, it just looks really cool, and the projectile shots look really nice as well. I probably would use it as a mobbing dagger more than the Queen Stinger because while it doesn't have the ability to pierce because it fires 2 shots and it fires a lot of them, it still maintains the 5.6 range. The true range is worse, it's like 3.0 or like 2.8 or something like that, but it's, I think, a bit better in terms of its area coverage, so I think it's a decent A tier. Actually no, I don't think that's enough to put it A tier, so I'll put it B tier. I think that's it for the daggers. We'll cover the Oryx agents last. Moving on, I guess we'll talk about bows. So, I believe bow classes received a lot of the good white bags. If you think about it, most of the UTs for the staves or the daggers, they're not the best. You're mostly better off just sticking to your tier staves or tier daggers, but bows, archers, and huntresses and bards, stating it plain, the UT bows are fantastic. A lot of them, if not all of them, are fantastic. The other thing is that tiered bows are terrible. So bow classes are basically the class type that in order for you to play properly, you need the white bags for those classes. It's a double-edged sword in that it makes it so that getting a bow from a white bag is awesome. At the same time, if you don't have one, it can bog down the experience quite a bit. So moving on, let's start with the Void Bow. Void Bow, solid S tier item, reduced range and a slightly disjointed firing angle, but it does tremendous damage. It does a ridiculous amount of damage. It's spectacular. It's pretty much the best bow in the entire game in terms of just sheer numbers. I think that the Deathless Crossbow is a bit more practical, which is why I think Deathless Crossbow is better, but Deathless Crossbow is not even on this list, so we're not going to talk about that. Bow of the Void, if you get it and you play a bow class, this is by far the best damaging bow you could ever ask for. Unless you somehow manage to have the Nectar Crossfire land all of its shots along with them doing true damage, but you know, it's okay. Given the fact that most high damage UT items or weapons have some really dumb caveat behind it, with the Bow of the Void only having just slightly reduced range, the same as a dagger, not a bad trade-off. There's almost no weaknesses to this bow except for the fact that you kinda have to get used to the wonky shot pattern, but it's not that bad. Coral Bow, widely considered to be the replacement mobbing bow because it's a bit more consistent than your standard tiered bows. It's fallen out of favor. I definitely think it's gotten power crept, or not power crept, but it hasn't aged too well. Before, it used to be the main bow that you want to use alongside Doombow, the main two that you would switch out. But there are just better options these days because either you can just get by with the bow that doesn't need mobbing at all, or actually that's just about it. Or alternatively, you could just use a T-shot. So people don't use Coral Bow all too much since bards have kind of given the option for you to make bows like the Void Bow more effective at mobbing, and it's not bad. I still don't think it's bad, but I would have put it A tier a long time ago because Coral Bow is actually quite good. Now I kind of put it at B tier because it's not good enough for you to want to really use all that much, and most of the time, like I mentioned, people would just use their standard DPS bow as mobbing because of the enhanced range, and usually some other ability they have like the trap, or for the bard if they have parrots or the concertina, and for quivers on the archer. Leaf bow, A tier. It used to be the best bow in the game after its rework before the void bow got better. I still think it's a fantastic bow, has very good range, has a huge rate of fire and high average damage, and it also gives you 5 speed, which is desperately needed on archers and huntresses. So the main reason why I don't put it at S tier is because weapons with the main source of DPS being focused on attack speed suffer more from defense penalties, because in Realm of the Mad God, defense is a flat reduction of damage as opposed to in most other games where defense is a percentage reduction. So bows or any other weapon, by extension, that have a high rate of fire in exchange for a lower damage, such as the T-shot, get screwed a lot harder from high defense enemies versus bows that shoot very slowly but very powerfully like the Doombow. And so it doesn't warrant being S tier unless the target that you're attacking is consistently hit with armor break, and that is more common than it used to be back then, but not common enough to make Leaf Bow really considered an S tier. And that's also why most people in veteran runs for discords like Lost Halls don't put Leaf Bow as a vet rec, because it's just barely good enough. It's still great, make no mistake, but it's just not quite good enough to be a top tier. Moving on, Doombow, kind of B tier, because before, Doombow was the de facto best DPS bow in the game since it had really high base damage, and while you had a reduced rate of fire, the damage was just so incredibly better that it didn't matter. However, with the advent of Leaf Bow, Deathless Crossbow, the Void Bow, there's just so many better bows to use than Doombow. Not saying that Doombow is bad, but you know, it just got power crept. That's all I can say about it. I still love it. I think it has a really awesome sprite, especially its reskins, the Sun's Judgment and Bow of the Morningstar. You know, it's not bad. If you get it, it's definitely great, but I just wouldn't use it as my first choice anymore. Enemies are also a lot faster, so Doombow's slower projectile speed and lower rate of fire makes it a lot harder to aim than you would think. Last one, at least until we get into Predator Bow and stuff. T-Shot, kind of the same thing. I'm gonna put it... I'll put it here. T-Shot's fun. Everyone can agree that 1000 Shot Bow is a very fun bow to use. You can just machine gun like all over everything. Once again though, my argument with the Leaf Bow holds even more water for 1000 Shot. It's fantastic. You lose a lot of speed though, which is unfortunate. You do get a little bit more mana, but it just isn't good enough because unless you're doing true damage, and even if you are, you actually still do less damage than the Void Bow, because the average damage is about 85 versus the Void Bow's, let me check, I believe it's like 200. Yeah, the Void Bow's 200, so the T-Shot just straight up is much worse than a bunch of other bows in the game, including I think the Leaf Bow. So use it for fun, not much else. But if you notice, I ranked all UT bows at B tier or higher because all of them, relative to each other, have their places, but relative to other white bags from other weapons are great. Like the bows are probably the best out of all of the UTs because they all have their own practical uses. And so I can't really put any bow in C or D tier because they all are just useful. You would want to get all of them if possible. So that's my thoughts on that. Next, we'll move on to staves, and I truly believe that staves have received the short end of the stick because they have a lot of really, really poorly made staves, and I just don't think, yeah, it's kind of disappointing. I wish there were just better staves in the game that I could get, because the only one that I can reasonably see being a high tier is the Cult Staff, but even the Cult Staff is not that great. Moving on, let's just get right into it. Spirit Staff. It fires very quickly, and it does decent damage. Actually, no, it doesn't really do that much damage. It does do more damage than the Cosmic, but up to a very small amount of defense, and so therefore, it's essentially the equivalent of the T-Shot for a staff, only worse. It just does far less damage, and it has better range, but yeah, it's... Given the fact that it's a white bag from the Magic Woods, and I just really don't think that people would really use the Spirit Staff in any situation. They would just rather use a Cosmic or a Vital Unity. It's just worse than the Vital Unity in general too. Okay, Tezcatlipoca's Tail. I'm gonna place it at probably high B tier. Now, it combines a mixture of the Queenstinger's Dagger and the Doombow, where it has an extended range, a much worse rate of fire, but it does true damage in all of its shots. So this could be a very powerful staff against high defense targets. and I think it does more damage than the T12 and T13 staff at roughly about 40 defense, which most bosses have. They have roughly about 50 defense, if not a little higher. It works, but I think, well, okay, it's banned in vet runs, and I think the reason why is because they almost always have an Augmer, in which case you're fighting 0 defense. While its true damage passive does have its benefits, I think it is not as good as people think it is, and so I'll put it at B tier, top of B tier. It's probably one of the better UT staffs in the game, but if one of the better ones is placed at the top of B tier, that kind of goes to show my sentiments with just about every other staff. So let's get this over with. Cult Staff. Unholy Sacrifice I'll put at the lower of A tier. Unholy Sacrifice, the Cult Staff, does massive damage. Ridiculously powerful damage. You do kind of have to stand point blank to land all 4 shots, but the shots hit multiple targets too, so it doubles as not only a solid DPS staff, but also mobbing staff because it has 8 tiles of range, which is the same as the standard staff, I believe. Actually, no. I think the standard staff is 8.5, so you only lose half a tile. It's not that bad. Here's the issue. You have to shoot backwards. Yeah. Now, those who can get the hang of it can make it work, but it's really counterproductive for classes like the Necromancer or the Wizard especially, because you have to choose either between shooting your staff or hitting a spell bomb, and you can't do both at the same time, of course, because you have to shoot backwards. You have to aim behind your character. It's such a ridiculous contingency. I can understand why, because if you could just shoot it normally, it would be an extremely broken staff. It does so much damage, but oh my goodness, shooting backwards is too debilitating of a condition that you have to meet to really want to use it. Like, I wish I could put it S tier, but unlike the Void Bow, this thing has too many flaming hoops you have to jump through to make it good, and it's so impractical. It is the best staff in the game, probably the best weapon in the game, bar none, if it just didn't shoot backwards. If you had something else that you had to deal with, like the shots are wavy or whatever. I'll put it A tier. I think that's a pretty fair rating for it. It can't get S tier because it's not like be all end all that, you know, most wizards would want to go for compared to the Void Bow. Esben Staff, C tier. I get what it's trying to do. It's trying to be the mobbing staff, but you get no damage bonuses. You actually lose damage from using the staff, and it's, I mean, no one really likes it. It has an awkward firing angle and amplitude. It's just, I really can't see a reason to want to use it compared to just a standard staff. In fact, if you do get the Unholy Sacrifice, it just beats out the Esben Staff altogether. C tier because given that it drops in the Ice Cave, which is one of the more difficult dungeons if we're talking about the relative power scale of every dungeon, it's unimpressive. In fact, the entire Esben set is unimpressive except for the skull and the ring. The robe and staff do need an upgrade. EP, I'll put as C tier. Okay, hear me out on this. This technically, practically speaking, is a D tier staff, but the reason why I put it at C tier is because Sprite Worlds is super common, EP is a very common white bag. It has a beautiful fame bonus of 6%, which you don't see very often in lower dungeons. It does nothing else apart from that, except there are surprisingly a lot of instances where you actually can safely use the staff against a lot of bosses because they're vulnerable for a period of time, such as having, you know, little periods of phases, including Oryx 3 himself, who has the no, this cannot be phase where he starts like panting and breathing on the ground and you can hit him for free for like 3 seconds. When those conditions are met, this staff can be beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. It's really fun to use, and it's easy to pop things like chests as well as the void little flame thing at the end where he drops his loot. So there are purposes for the staff, and it's fun. It's a staple. I like the sprite of it, and it's a pretty solid nostalgia staff. It was the first UT I think I've ever gotten. Maybe if it was the Planewalker, I don't remember, but it holds a place in my heart. Crystal Serpent Staff, I'll put it at top of C tier because similar to the Poison Fang Dagger, when you would want to target this staff or when you would want to go after it, it's not bad. It has roughly about the same DPS as I think a T9 staff, and it has a 9.0 range. So this is a solid early game staff to pick up. It doesn't belong in D tier for that reason, and I've used it actually during my initial attempt at a Necromancer PPE. It was fun, I liked it. Alright, I think that wraps it up for all the staffs. So then moving on, let's go to the wands. I'm gonna try to see if I can do this in one video episode. It might go to 40 minutes. If it does, I apologize. Okay, the wands. Not nearly as shafted as the staffs, but there are definitely some bad eggs here. Okay, Soul's Guidance. I don't have an opinion on this because I've never gotten one, nor have I ever seen anyone use it. Let me just look it up on the wiki real quick. So I think it just looks like a standard tier 1 with maybe comparable damage, but apparently whenever you're taking damage or while equipping this wand, you have a 10% chance to release the skull little soul thing, and does some damage for you. It's I guess it's okay. It's just a little hard to shoot. I'm gonna probably just put it at C tier because I don't really have a proper assumption or like judgment for it. It looks like it could be a bit better than the Crystal Serpent, so I'm gonna put it over here. But some people say it's bad. Like I've heard 1 or 2 people say that's like really bad wand. So maybe I'll just put it down here. I guess it's okay. Frozen Wand, or Crystal Wand, sorry I keep mixing the two up. I'll put it at B tier. This is a wand I think that does a pretty solid job of doing the true damage aspects. So it outdamages the Condu at 30 defense and the Recomp at 21 defense, which are much lower thresholds than the Tail and I think the Queenstinger's Dagger. So I think that's a more properly executed true damage weapon compared to its counterparts, and I'm gonna put it at top of B tier. It's pretty easy to get too. Oh, I should mention that one bonus that these true damage weapons have is that they make the Parasite's Chamber really easy to complete. So if you ever go into a para, you should bring one of these along if you have one. Let's see. Conducting Wand, A tier, maybe a little bit better than the Cult Staff. Now, Conduit Wand, it's a better version of the T-Shot in my opinion. It has a higher rate of fire with the same sort of range, maybe a little bit less. It doesn't pierce, but it does good damage. It gives you 4 dex, 4 wisdom, a very solid wand even to this day. Even though the Wand of the Fallen technically does more damage in general, the Conduit I think is more reliable because it doesn't have as low of a range, and it's a really good wand. I don't know what else to say about it. Okay, moving on. St. Abraham's Wand. I guess it kind of has the same thing as like the Crystal Serpent. When you get it, and given the fact that St. Abraham Wand is not a white bag, and you get it quite commonly, it's okay. The higher range may be enough incentive for you to want to use it because you don't lose as much damage as if you were to use, let's say, which one has more range but less damage? Actually, that would be the Sea Sword. But yeah. It gives you more range, and while that 1 extra range is not as beneficial considering that wands already have an impressive 9 range, it's okay. I've actually used St. Abraham's Wand quite a bit, and back in the days in Laud and Manlab where you could use it for free to kill the dragons without ever aggroing it, or Dr. Terrible, it had its uses. I liked it a lot. Alright, Sprite Wand, D tier. It's a meme item, it's a joke. It can do either really terrible damage or really ridiculously high damage, but overall, yeah, it's a joke item. Maybe it might be a little bit better than... nah, it's just a bad item. Okay, Wand of the Bulwark. Okay, I'm gonna put it at the bottom of C tier because when it works, from what I've heard, there are actually instances where the Bulwark is fantastic. I've never seen the reason to use this, but I think it has the same kind of properties as the EP staff where when it needs to be used or when it can be used, it can outshine just about every other wand in the game. But those contingencies and conditions are so strict that you really can't find a use for it unless it's like all the stars aligned and you get that one shot. Wand of the Fallen, I'll also put at A tier. Similar to the Void Bow, it reduces the amount of range that you have on the weapon and slightly reduces the rate of fire, but you get great damage. It's awesome. Not exactly as good as, and I think the Conduit, at least in my personal opinion. I think I would rather use the Conduit than a Fallen. The Fallen looks beautiful though. It's a cherry branch. It's a cherry blossom branch, which is cool. It's great. I think it's a good item. I think that's it for the wands, and last but not least we have swords and katanas, so let's go to swords quickly. Swords are a mixed bag. I think it's divisive. There are some UT swords that are great and some UT swords that are not so great, so we'll go after them one at a time. Ancient Stone Sword used to be awesome. It used to be a terrific white bag to get, and decently common too, since you had 2 chances to get it for each Oryx. Not anymore these days because there are just a bunch of better untiered swords out there. But it still has its practical purposes because it functions similar to the Doombow, where it trades in some rate of fire in exchange for doing more damage in a slow amount of time. So it does good against high defense targets whenever you need to, but apart from that, not much else, although it does have 0.5 more range. Demon Blade, this is gonna anger a lot of people, I put at the bottom of C tier, or not bottom of C, I'll put at the top of C tier. Okay, I know I'm gonna just start a riot here, and believe me, I don't want to. The Demon Blade is my favorite white bag sprite out of, I think actually pretty much my favorite white bag sprite, period. Here's the issue. You have to stand point blank to land all of your shots in. While melees in certain instances can do that, like with the Paladin's Oreo and the Knight's Crystal Shield, yeah, okay, apart from that, there's just really no reason for you to use Demon Blade over any other sword, practically speaking. Even if you do have the maximum amount of damage, or even if you can stand point blank on a boss, there are 2 other swords that can do comparable damage, just more safely. And so therefore, while I really wish I could rate the Demon Blade higher, I just found it to be just an infinitely worse version of the Pixie Sword. And I didn't want to because I love the sprite. The sprite's beautiful. Second highest damage I think out of any weapon in the entire game. Just too bad that there's no way you can get that damage in unless you risk dying instantly. Crystal Sword, probably a worse version of the Ancient Stone Sword. You get 1 whole extra point of range compared to regular tiered swords, but you lose too much damage to warrant using this over just, I don't know, like an Ancient Stone Sword, or, you know, tiered swords are not that bad either, because it's a lot safer these days for melee classes to go in close range, since we're in the steamrolling meta, so the Crystal Sword has gotten power creeped out quite hard. But in the early days, this actually was a very powerful sword. Colossus. Okay. Everyone would probably put Kalo at S tier. I'm gonna put it at A tier. For 2 reasons. 1, I have too many of these. And I personally hate this sword because I've never gotten an M seal and I really want an M seal. However, something that I think people are not really looking into too well is that the Kalo sword has gotten nerfed from bards coming into the game, because while the increased attack range has been a pretty big benefit among the Realm community, for weapons with strange shot patterns like the Kalo sword and the Coral bow, bards actually do poorly with this weapon. They actually make the weapon worse because the firing angle now becomes even more stringent for you to make accommodations for, since it just makes the amplitude a lot wider, or not wider, it makes it a lot longer. So overall, this sword is a bit tricky to use when a bard is in play, because it has a tipper component where the bulk of its shots hitting are either at the start of your range, which is basically in front of you, or at the very end of it where the shots converge. And so it's difficult to space with this sword when they're for one part of the fight you're enhanced by the bard's range and the other part of the fight you're not. So I don't think it really deserves S tier because of that very specific reason, although it does have wonderful damage. That being said, chances are you're not landing every single one of your shots in the middle of a fight when it's chaotic, and so I think a Sword of Splendor is just straight up better than the Kalo sword, because while the Sword of Splendor's average damage is about, I think, 20 points less, you're probably landing the Splendor more consistently than you are with the Kalo sword, which means more DPS overall. So A tier because it's powerful, but a very wonky shot pattern that's inadvertently gotten screwed over by a new class. Pirate King's Cutlass, I actually think I'll put it at S tier because it is a very common white bag, surprisingly. However, it does a lot of damage. It does a lot of damage. This is a better version of the Kondu Wand, which is a better version of the T-Shot. Very, very minuscule, almost negligible amount of range lost from this sword. And you lose a little bit of defense, but not enough to warrant any specific attention, and you gain a little bit of speed. However, the Pirate King's Cutlass has an average damage comparable to a Splendor, which is great. This thing, when considering how common this white bag is and how DDoS is one of the most frequently run dungeons in the entire game, yeah, this is probably the best way to handle the Kondu and the T-Shot because you don't lose any damage practically. This is as good as a tiered sword, but with a higher rate of fire, so there might be chances where it gets nerfed out, but for the most part, this sword straight destroys every other tiered sword in the entire game, or almost every other sword in this entire tier list except for the Kalo sword, because it's just so consistent. It's a really consistent sword. It has a small damage spread too. Apart from that though, I also like the fact that it kind of is a different type of sword because the Kala Sword, the Demon Blade. These are both great swords, but then we also have Ancient Stone Sword, the Crystal Sword, which are pretty much broadswords, while the Cutlass is a cutlass. It's a different sword. I really think that Deca should try putting in different types of swords, because most of the swords that we have in this game are standard broadswords. If we could have like claymores or glaives. No, glaives are a spear. If we could have like, I don't know, katana. No, we have katanas. You guys get what I mean. If we could have different types of swords instead of just broadswords, and Cutlass is one of them. I really like the fact that it's a different type of sword. If we could have a scimitar or just about anything else, that'd be more creative, I think. They've done a good job with the bows, at least in my opinion, because, you know, these are all regular bows. We have a crossbow here. If they could add more crossbows, that'd be kind of cool, but for the most part, swords have been kind of cookie cutter when it comes to the type of sprite that you have for them. You know, I actually noticed the problem with these tier list videos is because I record them all in one sitting, the quality of commentary deteriorates over time, because I start to stutter a lot more or trip on my words or have to reiterate certain things or have to like scrap a take and do it again, because I think towards the end I either get exhausted or whatever. But anyways, let's wrap this up. Celestial Blade. It is the Kondu / most of the Kondu version of the bow class. Or no, more rather, it's sort of the leaf bow / Kondu for the katana class, where you have really solid damage in exchange for just not being able to pierce, which is great because ninjas, while they do have the ability to pierce with almost all their katanas, they could use a katana with just really strong DPS, and Celestial Blade is one of them. Plus, I love the sprites of their projectiles. It shoots like stars or something. It's really cool. And I like anything purple related because I think purple looks really good in 8-bit textures, which is why both the Void looks nice and Cronus and a Celestial Blade. I put it A tier because every ninja wants this, especially my friend Woods. He loves this katana with all his heart, and so therefore I gotta put it high tier because I think it merits that kind of attention. Doku's gotten nerfed to not really be as good as it used to be. However, it is still a very powerful katana. It's a side grade. It slightly beats out the T12 Masamune still, I think, but it just gets destroyed by the Sadamune. Still, I think it has its practical uses, and the higher range is always nice too. Prior to the nerf, I would have put it at the top of A tier, but I think the nerf was noticeable enough, along with just there being better options, for this to be dropped down a full tier. Ray Katana sucks. I'm sure we all can agree on this. Ray Katana is terrible. It's the worst white bag out of all the event gods, despite it dropping from arguably the most dangerous event god in the entire game. So terrible. Void Blade, it's strange. I think it's more practical than a bulwark for sure, but I don't know exactly. I might maybe put it at the middle of C tier because I've heard a lot of ninja mains who say that this is the best katana in the game, given that it could do ridiculous amounts of damage, and I can see that. But I don't think it's the most practical. I love the sprite. The sprite's gorgeous. I just never really found enough empirical evidence to put this any higher than maybe B tier. Yeah, I think that's fine. As to the Agents of Oryx weapons, I've never seen them before. I know of their existence because I've read up on them a lot, but they're just too rare for me to really make any judgments for. However, I'm gonna try my best to rate them just by reading up on them. Now, from what I've heard, the Bounty Hunter dagger is just... there's no weaknesses to it. You have just a little less range than a tier dagger. It has just as much damage as a tier dagger. I think it has a little bit less damage than the Dagger of Sinister Deeds, but it has a higher rate of fire, so I think it actually beats out the tier 13 dagger in general. And there's no weird pattern. Yeah, actually this dagger is great. Holy crap. I'm gonna actually put this S tier. 145 average damage. Let me just check. 145 times 1.2. I think that brings out to about like 175. And then the Ripper is... no, the Ripper is still, I think, better. Yeah, no, the Ripper is just slightly better, but the Bounty Hunter dagger does not come with slower projectile speed, which effectively makes this the best dagger in the game. Right? Yeah. And it shoots through obstacles. Wait, holy crap, these weapons are broken. Oh my goodness. Alright, then S tier, I think, if you have a Bounty Hunter dagger, grats. The wand. Okay, let's check out the wand real quick. So let's see. 4 shots. Ooh, that's rough. 5.2 range. That's really small, and it's a really tight true range. I actually think that's the same range as the Demon Blade. Actually, yeah, I think this is a bad one. I'm gonna put this at maybe the bottom of C tier. Like, it does some pretty massive amounts of damage, but its projectile speed is quite slow. Actually, it might even be slower than the Ripper because it has a 6.5 projectile speed. The Ripper is 7.5. This is slower than the Ripper. So yeah, I think the Tyrant's one's actually quite bad. But I know that the Staff is also, like, okay. I think it's a worse version of the Tail. And I put the Tail at B tier, so I'm gonna put this at the top of C tier. Okay, yeah, I can see it. This is essentially a worse version of the Tail. The Predator Bow. Oh, I've heard good things about this. I'm gonna put it at the top of... probably at mid, or like the same as the Leaf Bow. So it has 5 shots. The true range is 2.84 tiles, which is not that hard to get close enough to. And also mobs. If you land 3 out of 5 shots, then you beat out the Void Bow at 103 defense. If you land all 5, oh my goodness, I'm just realizing something. This bow is a better version of the Cult Staff. I might actually put this at the top of 8. Does anyone have a Predator Bow and has used this before? Oh my goodness. This thing is fearsome. I wish I had one of these. I can definitely see this bow being extremely powerful if you can land all 5 shots. I think this is just a better Nectar Crossfire in general. Wow, that's crazy. Alright, Henchman's Claymore. Let me look at it. I think it's just a worse version of the tiered swords. I'm gonna probably put it like maybe here. Yeah, I think it's just is generally, no, actually probably at the bottom. It doesn't look that great, so put it at the bottom there. Katana. Okay, now when I saw this Katana, I wanted to put it S tier just from the sprite. Look at this sprite. The sprite's legit. Oh my god, it's like a machine katana, like a cybernetic kind of katana. It's really cool looking. But I think the thing with it is that it's okay, so it's essentially the Ripper for katanas, which makes sense. It's a really slow rate of like projectile speed, even slower than the Ripper, but it does tremendous damage. It says it does less damage than the Celestial Blade, but I kind of want to put it at S tier just because it just looks so cool. You know what? I can. This is an opinion tier list. This is my favorite UT weapons. I don't have all of them, but I think just from seeing them and trying to get my best educated guess on each one, that's kind of how I would rate these weapons. So yeah, that's gonna be it, guys. Hope you enjoyed watching. Again, I'm sorry for how the commentary sort of gets worse and worse as the video goes on, but in my defense, that's sort of how it is with long videos, so hope you can forgive me for that. But if you enjoyed, a rating would be much appreciated, and let me know your thoughts in the comment section below if you would make any changes to this rating, or if you think one weapon should get a higher rating than the other, or vice versa, if you think one should get a lower one than the other. But for now, that officially wraps it up for all of the UT items in the game. Now we're going to move over to ST items, which I hope you guys are looking forward to. So I'll see you guys then. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon in the next video. Take care.